Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now, let's start. The cold wind from the northern seas bit at Valdis Thrudheim's face as she stood at the prow of the longship. 8 years had passed since she'd seen the jagged coastline of her homeland. 8 years since she'd been stolen away in the night, her birthright ripped from her hands by treachery and blood. Now, at 26 winters, she was returning, not as the frightened girl who had fled, but as a shield maiden hardened by exile and battle. "Land," called out Halfdan from his position at the steering oar. "Jarlshofen appears on the horizon, Lady Valdis." She did not correct him for using her title. Though she had lived among the Saxons these past years, adopted their tongue and some of their ways, she had never forgotten who she was, the rightful heir to Ravnholm, daughter of Jarl Thorvald the Wise, whose blood had soaked the great hall's floorboards during Grimulf's betrayal. The warriors who had pledged themselves to her cause, a mixture of loyal Norsemen who had found her in exile and mercenaries paid with Saxon silver, watched her with reverence. They had heard the tales of the lost princess, how she had survived when all thought her dead, how she had built herself anew in a foreign land. But none knew of Kjartan Ingvarsson. None knew of the Saxon warrior who had found her half-dead on the shores of Northumbria, the man who had become her sword brother, her confidant, and eventually, against all wisdom, her heart's desire. "We should reach the harbour by midday," said Kjartan, coming to stand beside her. His Saxon accent still coloured his Norse, though he had learned it well over their years together. His hair was the colour of wheat fields in summer, his eyes the blue of a clear winter sky, so unlike the dark-haired, dark-eyed men of her homeland. "And what then?" he asked quietly, ensuring none of the crew could hear. "Then I take back what is mine," Valdis replied, her hand instinctively reaching for the sword at her hip, her father's sword, smuggled out of Ravnholm by the same loyal servant who had spirited her away on that blood-soaked night. Kjartan's hand brushed against hers, a touch so brief that any observer would have missed it. "And us?" Valdis kept her eyes fixed on the approaching shoreline. "One battle at a time, Saxon." 8 years ago, she would have spat that word, Saxon, as a curse. The raids on their settlements had been her first taste of battle, her first chance to prove herself worthy of her father's legacy. She had returned from those raids with glory and plunder, never once considering the lives she had shattered. Until fate had made her an exile among those very people, dependent on their mercy. And Kjartan had shown mercy when others would have seen only an enemy. A warrior in the service of Lord Ethelred, he had found her washed ashore after her escape ship had been caught in a storm. By rights, he should have killed her or taken her as a slave. Instead, he had seen the noble bearing beneath her sodden clothes, the fierce pride behind her eyes, and had offered sanctuary. What had begun as reluctant gratitude had grown into something neither of them had anticipated, something forbidden by both their peoples. The ship cut through the choppy waters toward Jarlshofen, the main port that served Ravnholm. Valdis could see the settlement now, the wooden piers stretching into the water, the cluster of buildings with their distinctive pitched roofs, smoke rising from hearth fires. Beyond them, on the hill overlooking both harbour and valley, stood the great hall of Ravnholm where Grimulf the usurper now sat upon her father's high seat. "They will have sentries watching the approaches," Kjartan said. "We fly no banner, but a ship of this size will draw attention." "Good," Valdis replied. "Let them wonder. Let them fear. By the time they know for certain who has returned, it will be too late." The plan was simple in its boldness. They would dock openly, claiming to be traders from the southern lands. Kjartan, with his foreign appearance, would play the role of a merchant seeking to establish new markets. The warriors would pose as his guards and crew. They would gather intelligence in the town, make contact with those still loyal to Valdis's family, and then strike during the Feast of Winter Nights, when Grimulf would be celebrating with his thanes in the Great Hall. But plans rarely survive first contact with the enemy. As they approached the harbour, Valdis saw that the usual activity of a trading port had been replaced by something else, something martial. Warriors lined the docks, their spears and shields gleaming in the autumn sun. 3 longships, their dragon heads facing outward, were moored with crews at the ready. "Something's wrong," muttered Halfdan. "This is no normal watch." Valdis narrowed her eyes. He knows, she said, the realization settling in her stomach like a stone. Somehow, Grimolf knows we're coming. Kjartan's hand moved to his sword hilt. Do we turn back? For a moment, Valdis considered it. They could sail further up the coast, land in secret, approach Ravnholm overland. But that would mean delay, and winter was approaching. Moreover, it would signal weakness. No, she decided. We continue as planned. If they challenge us, we are simple traders. If they attack... She met Kjartan's gaze. Then we fight. The crew tensed as they guided the ship toward the pier. Warriors moved to position themselves, hands casually near weapons but not drawing them. Kjartan stood tall beside Valdis, who had pulled a cloak over her distinctive red-gold hair and kept her face turned down, not in submission, but in concealment. A broad-shouldered man with a silver-streaked beard waited at the end of the pier, flanked by warriors. He wore a fine wool cloak pinned with a bronze brooch, marking him as a man of status. That's Hakon Grimtooth, Halfdan whispered to Valdis. Grimolf's right hand. The ship bumped gently against the pier. Ropes were thrown and secured. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Kjartan stepped forward, playing his role. Greetings, he called in carefully accented Norse. I am Kjartan of Northumbria, come to trade with the famous folk of Ravnholm. He gestured to the covered goods on the deck, actually weapons and armor, but concealed beneath trading cloth. I bring fine wools, silver work, and crafts from the Saxon lands. Hakon's eyes narrowed. Strange time of year for a Saxon to venture so far north. The best profits come to those who sail when others will not, Kjartan replied with a merchant smile. Hakon seemed to consider this, then nodded to his men. Search the ship. All of it. Valdis felt her warriors tense around her. If the search was thorough, their deception would be discovered. She caught Kjartan's eye and gave a subtle nod. They needed to act now. But before either could move, a new voice rang out across the harbor. Hakon! Is this how we welcome traders to Ravnholm now? With suspicion and drawn weapons. A tall woman strode down the pier. She wore a rich blue gown with a broached-over dress, and her dark hair was plaited with silver threads. Around her neck hung Thor's hammer in silver, and at her belt was a long knife. She carried herself with authority, and the warriors stepped aside for her with respect. Lady Sigrid, Hakon said, lowering his head slightly. Jarl Grimolf ordered all ships to be searched. There are rumors, my husband sees enemies in every shadow, the woman interrupted. Meanwhile, our trading partners take their business elsewhere, and our coffers grow lighter. She turned to Kjartan with a welcoming smile. Forgive our caution, Saxon. These are uncertain times. Kjartan bowed. No offense is taken where none is intended, my lady. Sigrid's gaze moved over the ship's occupants, lingering for just a moment on the cloaked figure of Valdis. Something flickered in her eyes, a recognition, perhaps, or simply curiosity, before she turned back to Hakon. Let them land and set up their wares in the market square. They can be watched there as easily as here, and without insulting potential trading partners. Hakon looked as if he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. As you wish, Lady Sigrid. But I will assign guards to watch them. Of course, she replied smoothly. Now, I must return to the hall. The preparations for winter nights require my attention. She addressed Kjartan once more. You and your people are welcome to join our feast in 3 nights' time. Traders are always welcome at Jarl Grimolf's table. With that, she departed, her attendants following in her wake. Valdis watched her go, confusion mingling with suspicion. Sigrid had not been in Ravnholm when Valdis was forced to flee. She must be Grimolf's new wife, taken to solidify his claim to the jarldom. Yet she had intervened on their behalf, against her husband's orders. Well, Kjartan murmured as they began unloading their disguised cargo, that was fortunate. Or a trap, Valdis replied quietly. She looked at me too long. She might suspect. Or she might simply be curious about a cloaked figure on a trading ship. He paused in his work. This doesn't change our plan, does it? Valdis shook her head. We proceed as intended. Make contact with my father's old allies, gather strength, then strike during the feast. She glanced toward the great hall on the hill. Though now we have an invitation, it seems. The marketplace of Jarlshofen bustled with activity despite the late season. Farmers brought in the last of their harvest, fishermen sold their catches, and craftspeople displayed their wares. Valdis and her people set up their false trading post, arranging the few genuine trade goods they had brought to maintain their cover. Kjartan played his role well, haggling with customers in his accented Norse, while Valdis kept herself inconspicuous, observing all around them. The warriors, disguised as servants and guards, spread throughout the market, listening for gossip and seeking out those who might still be loyal to Jarl Thorvald's line. By midday, a picture was emerging. Grimolf's rule had brought prosperity to some but hardship to many. He favored his own kinsmen and friends, giving them the best lands and positions, while those who had been loyal to Thorvald found themselves marginalized. There were whispers of discontent, carefully hidden behind closed doors and lowered voices. More concerning were the rumors of alliances with Danish warlords and planned raids on Saxon settlements. If true, this would explain Kjartan's conflicted loyalty, his duty to warn his people against such threats versus his oath to help Valdis reclaim her birthright. As the day waned, a hunched figure in a worn cloak approached their stall. The old man examined their wares with gnarled hands, leaning heavily on a walking stick. "Fine work, these Saxon brooches," he said loudly. Then, in a whisper so soft that only Valdis could hear, "The old eagle still has some feathers left. The smithy at dusk." He shuffled away before Valdis could respond. She recognized the reference. Her father had been called the Eagle of Ravnholm, and his most loyal followers had used the bird as their symbol. "We have a contact," she murmured to Kjartan when no one was within earshot. "The smithy, at dusk." As the sun began to set, painting the fjord in gold and crimson, Valdis and Kjartan made their way to the smithy that stood at the edge of town. Two of their warriors followed at a distance, alert for any sign of a trap. The forge was still active, the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal ringing out as they approached. The smith, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, looked up as they entered. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Valdis, though she still kept her hood up. "We're closed," he said gruffly. "Come back tomorrow." "The old eagle sent us," Valdis replied quietly. The smith studied them for a long moment, then nodded to his apprentice. "Finish that axe head, boy. And make sure no one disturbs us." He led them through the back of the forge into a small living area, closing the door firmly behind them. Only then did Valdis lower her hood. The smith dropped to one knee immediately. "My lady," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought you dead all these years." "Rise, Gunnar," Valdis said, recognizing him now as one of her father's weapon makers. "I need allies, not subjects kneeling in the dirt." Gunnar stood, staring at her in wonder. "You have your father's way of speaking," he said with a sad smile. Then his gaze shifted to Kjartan, suspicion replacing awe. "And who is this foreigner?" "My most trusted ally," Valdis replied firmly. "Kjartan Ingvarsson of Northumbria. Without him, I would not be standing before you now." Gunnar's expression remained doubtful, but he nodded. "Any friend of the Eagle's daughter is welcome here. But we must be quick. Grimolf has spies everywhere." Over the next hour, Gunnar revealed what had happened in Ravnholm during Valdis's absence. Grimolf had consolidated his power through a combination of brutality and strategic marriages. His new wife, Sigrid, was the daughter of a powerful Jarl from the eastern fjords, bringing with her wealth and warriors. "But there are many who remember your father's just rule," Gunnar assured her. "Warriors who pledged themselves to the Eagle and have never forgotten their oaths. Farmers who prospered under Thorvald's protection. Even some of Grimolf's own men who have grown disillusioned with his greed and cruelty." "How many would stand with me if I were to challenge Grimolf openly?" Valdis asked. Gunnar considered this. "Perhaps 30 trusted warriors in and around Jarlshofen. More if word spreads to the outlying farms and settlements. But Grimolf commands at least twice that number, and they are well armed. Kjartan spoke up. What of this Sigrid? Where do her loyalties lie? That is harder to say, Gunnar admitted. She is not loved, being an outsider, but she is respected. She has tempered some of Grimolf's harsher impulses and has been generous to the common folk. Some say she married him only to secure peace for her father's lands, not out of any affection. Valdis digested this information. We plan to strike during the winter night's feast. The usurper and his captains will be gathered in one place, their guard lowered by mead and celebration. Gunnar nodded slowly. A bold plan. Risky, but with the element of surprise. He trailed off, thinking. I can gather our allies, ensure they are armed and ready. But you'll need a way into the great hall itself. Lady Sigrid has already provided that, Kjartan said. She's invited us to the feast as traders. Gunnar's bushy eyebrows rose. Indeed? That's fortunate. Or concerning. Sigrid is no fool if she suspects who you are. Then we must ensure she doesn't discover the truth until it's too late, Valdis said firmly. Can you get word to the loyal warriors without raising suspicion? I can, Gunnar confirmed. Many still wear the eagle feather somewhere on their person, small enough to be overlooked, but a sign to those who know. I'll spread the word. When the horn sounds 3 times during the feast, they are to be ready. As they finalized their plans, a sudden commotion outside drew their attention. The smithy's apprentice burst through the door, his face pale. Jarl's men, he gasped. Searching every building in town. They're heading this way. Gunnar moved quickly, opening a small trapdoor in the floor. The coal cellar, he explained. Hurry. Valdis and Kjartan descended into the dark space just as the sound of approaching footsteps became audible. Gunnar replaced the trapdoor and covered it with a heavy fur, then positioned himself at his anvil, hammer in hand, as if he had been working all along. From their hiding place, Valdis could hear muffled voices above, Gunnar's gruff responses, the clipped tones of Grimolf's warriors. Her hand found Kjartan's in the darkness, their fingers intertwining. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the weight of her birthright, she felt a moment of peace in his presence. They're gone, Gunnar's voice came eventually, as he lifted the trapdoor. But this confirms it, Grimolf suspects something. He's ordered searches throughout the town. Does he know I've returned? Valdis asked as they climbed out. I don't think so. The order was to search for suspicious foreigners. They're particularly interested in your ship and crew. Kjartan frowned. We need to warn our people to be on guard. Go, Gunnar told them. Use the back paths. I'll continue gathering our allies. 2 nights from now, at the feast, Ravnholm will see the return of its true heir. As they slipped away into the gathering darkness, Valdis felt the weight of her father's sword at her hip and the heavier weight of her purpose. 8 years of exile, of planning, of hardening herself for this moment. 2 more days, and she would either reclaim her birthright or join her father in death. The following day passed in tense preparation. Valdis remained hidden in their camp outside the town, while Kjartan maintained their merchant facade in the marketplace. The warriors, now alerted to the increased scrutiny, were careful to avoid drawing attention. By evening, word had reached them through Gunnar that 20 reliable warriors had been contacted and would be ready at the signal. It wasn't as many as Valdis had hoped for, but combined with her own crew, it might be enough if surprise was on their side. As night fell, Kjartan returned to their camp with troubling news. Grimolf has doubled the guard at the Great Hall, he reported. And there's talk that he's postponed some kind of announcement until after the winter night's feast. What announcement? Valdis asked, looking up from the map of Ravnholm she had been studying. No one seems to know for certain. But there are whispers about an alliance with the Danes, possibly a marriage alliance. Valdis felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Grimolf is already married to Sigrid. Unless he plans to set her aside, Kjartan suggested grimly. Or offer someone else in marriage, a daughter, perhaps, or a sister. The implications hung between them. political marriages were common among the Norse nobility, cementing alliances and securing peace. If Grimolf was negotiating such an arrangement with the Danes, it would strengthen his position considerably. "All the more reason we cannot fail tomorrow night," Valdis said, her voice hardening with resolve. Later, as the camp settled into uneasy sleep, Kjartan found Valdis sitting alone by the small fire, staring into the flames. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You should rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will test us all." "I keep thinking about my father," she replied, not looking up from the fire. "About his last moments. Did he know I had escaped? Did he die believing his line would continue?" She paused. "And what would he think of me now? Of the choices I've made? Of me?" Kjartan finished when she didn't. Valdis finally turned to face him. In the firelight, her features seemed both softer and more defined, the proud brow of a Jarl's daughter, the determined set of her jaw, but also the vulnerability in her eyes that she showed to no one else. "My father raided your lands, Kjartan. Your people killed his brother in battle. By all the old ways, we should be enemies. And yet here we are," he said, taking her hand. "Perhaps the old ways need to change." "Can they?" she asked. "Even if I reclaim Ravnholm tomorrow, even if by some miracle I become Jarl, what then? My people would never accept a Saxon as their lord." "I'm not asking to be their lord," Kjartan replied. "Only to be at your side, in whatever way you'll have me." Valdis leaned forward until her forehead rested against his. "There are days when I wish we could simply sail away, find some distant shore where no one knows of Ravnholm or Northumbria, where we could just be Valdis and Kjartan." "We still could," he said, though they both knew it wasn't true. "No," she whispered. "I am my father's daughter. I cannot abandon my birthright any more than you could abandon your oath to your lord." She closed her eyes. "But tonight we are just ourselves." In the quiet of the forest, with only the stars as witnesses, they found solace in each other's arms, a moment of peace before the storm that awaited them. The day of the winter night's feast arrived cold and clear. From their camp, Valdis could see the great hall of Ravnholm standing proud on its hill, smoke rising from its central hearth. Somewhere within those wooden walls, Grimolf sat upon her father's high seat, drinking from her father's cups, believing himself secure in his stolen power. By midday, Kjartan returned from the town with their formal invitation to the feast, a courtesy extended to visiting merchants of note. With him came final instructions from Gunnar. Their allies would be positioned both inside and outside the hall, ready to move at the signal. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Valdis prepared herself. She donned a fine wool gown over her fighting tunic, a concession to appearance that would not hamper her when the time came to draw steel. Over this, she wore a cloak that could be quickly discarded. Her father's sword was hidden beneath the folds of fabric, strapped to her back where it would not be immediately visible. Kjartan dressed as befitted a prosperous Saxon merchant, though he too concealed weapons beneath his finery. 4 of their most trusted warriors would accompany them as servants, while the rest would position themselves around the hall, ready to move on Gunnar's signal. "Are you ready?" Kjartan asked as the time approached. Valdis touched the raven pendant at her throat, a gift from her father on her 16th birthday, the last she had celebrated in Ravnholm. "I have been ready for 8 years." The great hall of Ravnholm blazed with light and sound as they approached. Torches lined the path leading to its massive doors, and the sounds of music, laughter, and revelry spilled out into the night. Warriors stood guard at the entrance, checking weapons and identities of those entering. "Kjartan of Northumbria," he announced confidently when they reached the doors. "Merchant. My companion and servants were invited by Lady Sigrid herself." The guards examined their invitation, then nodded. "Weapons stay with us," one said gruffly. Kjartan handed over his visible sword and knife with apparent reluctance, as did their servants. Valdis gave up a small eating knife, keeping her face partially obscured by her hood. The guards, seeing only a merchant's woman companion, paid her little attention, exactly as she had hoped. Inside, the hall was transformed for the feast. Long tables lined the walls, laden with food and drink. A great fire roared in the central hearth, casting dancing shadows on the carved pillars and tapestries. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat the high seat, her father's seat, with Grimolf upon it. Valdis had prepared herself for this moment, had hardened her heart against the rage and grief that threatened to overwhelm her at the sight of her father's murderer in his rightful place. Still, she had to clench her fists at her sides to keep from reaching for her hidden sword immediately. Grimolf was older than she remembered, his once dark beard now streaked with grey, his face more lined. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, ever watchful. Beside him sat a woman who could only be Sigrid, resplendent in a gown of deep red, her dark hair elaborately braided and adorned with silver. "There," Kjartan murmured, nodding subtly toward a group of men standing near one of the side tables. The ones with eagle feather designs on their belt pouches. Gunnar's people. Valdis noted them, then continued her survey of the hall. She recognized some faces from her youth, warriors who had served her father, now seemingly loyal to his killer. Were they truly turned, or simply surviving? She would soon find out. A servant directed them to seats at one of the lower tables, befitting their status as visiting merchants. As they settled in, Valdis kept her hood up, though she positioned herself to maintain a clear view of Grimolf and the high seat. The feast began in earnest, with servants bringing platters of roasted meats, bread, and autumn vegetables. Mead and ale flowed freely, and skalds took turns entertaining the gathering with tales of gods and heroes. Through it all, Valdis watched and waited, noting which warriors drank deeply and which remained vigilant, mapping paths to the high seat in her mind. Midway through the evening, when the hall was warm with food and drink and the mood had grown more boisterous, Grimolf rose from the high seat. Conversation gradually died down as he raised his hands for attention. "Friends! Thanes! Honored guests," his voice boomed across the hall. "We gather tonight to celebrate winter nights, to honor our ancestors and prepare for the dark months ahead." He lifted a drinking horn. "To the gods who watch over Ravnholm." The assembly echoed his toast, drinking deeply. Valdis raised her cup to her lips but did not drink. Beside her, she felt Kjartan tense slightly. "But we celebrate more than just the turning of the seasons," Grimolf continued. "Tonight, I am pleased to announce that Ravnholm's future is secured through a new alliance with our friends across the sea." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Grimolf gestured, and a man stepped forward from the shadows beside the high seat, a Dane, by his dress and bearing, with a gold arm ring marking him as a man of importance. "Jarl Sturkar of Hedeby honors us with his presence," Grimolf announced. "And with an offer that will bring prosperity and security to our lands for generations to come." The Danish Jarl bowed his head in acknowledgement, his eyes coolly assessing the gathered Norsemen. 2 days hence," Grimolf declared, "we will seal our alliance with the most sacred of bonds. My daughter, Thyra, will journey to Hedeby as Jarl Sturkar's bride." Cheers erupted from Grimolf's supporters, though Valdis noted that many in the hall seemed less enthusiastic, their applause perfunctory at best. She glanced at Sigrid and saw that the woman's face had gone carefully blank, her hands folded in her lap. "And now," Grimolf continued when the noise had subsided, "let us welcome Thyra, who will soon bring honor to Ravnholm as a Jarl's wife." From a side door, a young woman entered. She moved with grace despite her obvious discomfort at being the center of attention. Her hair was the same flame red as Valdis's own, and something in her bearing, in the proud set of her shoulders despite her downcast eyes, struck a chord of recognition. Beside her, Kjartan inhaled sharply. "Valdis," he whispered, so low that only she could hear. "She looks like, I know," Valdis breathed, her mind racing. The girl couldn't be more than 18, which meant she must have been born just before the coup. "My father's second wife was with child when I left." Understanding dawned like ice water in her veins. This girl, this Thyra, was her half-sister, a daughter of Jarl Thorvald born after Valdis had fled. Somehow, she had survived Grimolf's purge of their family, perhaps protected by her age and the fact that, as a female, she posed less immediate threat to his rule. And now Grimolf was using her as a pawn in his political games, wedding her to a Danish Jarl to secure his position. "This changes things," Kjartan murmured. Indeed it did. Valdis had come to reclaim her birthright, to avenge her father, to kill the man who had murdered him. But now there was someone else to consider, blood of her blood, an innocent in this power struggle. As Thyra took her place at the high table, eyes still lowered, Valdis made a decision. The plan would proceed, but with one vital change: her half-sister would not be collateral damage in her vengeance. The feast continued, with more food, more drink, more tales. Valdis noted that Thyra ate little and spoke less, responding only when directly addressed. The Danish Jarl watched her with the assessing eye of a man examining horseflesh at market, while Grimolf appeared pleased with himself. Only Sigrid seemed troubled, her gaze occasionally straying to the girl with what looked like genuine concern. "It's nearly time," Kjartan said quietly, as the night deepened and the celebration grew more raucous. "Gunnar's men are in position." Valdis nodded, her mind now settled. "When the signal comes, you and our warriors focus on Grimolf's men. I will deal with the usurper myself." She paused. "And I need you to ensure Thyra's safety." Kjartan met her gaze. "You're certain about this?" "She is my father's daughter," Valdis replied simply. "I will not let her be sacrificed, either to Grimolf's ambitions or to my vengeance." As agreed, they separated, moving casually to different positions within the hall. Valdis made her way closer to the high seat, while Kjartan positioned himself near the side door where Thyra had entered. Their warriors dispersed similarly, each finding a strategic location. Valdis caught Gunnar's eye across the room and gave a subtle nod. The old smith touched the eagle feather on his belt, then made his way toward the doors where the ceremonial horn hung. The moment had come. 3 clear notes rang out, cutting through the noise of the feast. The sound was tradition, a call to honor the gods at the height of celebration, but tonight, it carried a different meaning. In the momentary lull that followed, Valdis threw back her hood and cloak in a single motion, drawing her father's sword from its hidden sheath. She leapt onto the nearest table, blade gleaming in the firelight. "Grimolf," she called, her voice ringing through the suddenly silent hall. "Murderer! Usurper! Face the daughter of Thorvald the Wise!" Chaos erupted. Warriors loyal to Grimolf reached for weapons, only to find Gunnar's men already armed and moving. Kjartan and their own warriors engaged the nearest threats, creating a path for Valdis toward the high seat. Grimolf stood frozen for a moment, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "Valdis Thorvaldsdottir," he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "The gods must favor me indeed, to deliver you to your death at last." He drew his sword, her father's ceremonial sword, she noted with fury, and stepped forward. "I thought you drowned in the storm. A mistake I will rectify tonight." Valdis jumped down from the table, meeting the first of Grimolf's guards with a flurry of strikes that sent him staggering backward. Another came at her from the side, but one of Gunnar's men intercepted him, shouting, "For the Eagle of Ravnholm!" The cry was taken up by others throughout the hall as more warriors revealed their true loyalties. The fighting spread quickly, the feast descending into a brutal melee. Through the chaos, Valdis kept her focus on Grimolf, cutting her way toward him with grim determination. She glimpsed Kjartan fighting his way toward Thyra, who had been pulled aside by Sigrid when the violence erupted. Grimolf, seeing her approach, barked orders at his remaining guards. 3 warriors formed a wall between him and Valdis, their shields locked together. "Hide behind your men, coward!" Valdis taunted. "As you did when you murdered my father in his sleep." Something flickered across Grimolf's face. Was it guilt? Fear? He retreated a step, then seemed to master himself. "Your father was weak," he called back. "Too willing to negotiate with Saxons and Franks when we should have been taking their lands and wealth." Valdis engaged the shield wall, looking for an opening. These were skilled warriors, professionals who had fought together before. But she had spent 8 years preparing for this moment, honing her skills against Saxon and Norse opponents alike. She feinted left, then dropped low as the rightmost warrior adjusted his shield. Her blade found the gap between greave and boot, hamstringing him. As he fell, the formation broke, and Valdis surged through, parrying a strike from the second warrior and delivering a pommel strike to the third's face that sent him reeling. Now only Grimolf stood between her and the high seat. "It doesn't have to end in your death," she told him, advancing steadily. "Surrender the jarldom, acknowledge me as Thorvald's true heir, and I will grant you exile rather than the blade." Grimolf laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "You always were arrogant, girl. Did you think I would not prepare for this day? That I would not take precautions against your return?" He raised his voice. "Sturkar! Now!" The Danish Jarl, who had been watching the battle with calculating eyes, raised his hand. The doors of the great hall burst open, and warriors in Danish garb poured in, at least 20 fresh fighters entering the already chaotic fray. "Did you think the Danes came only for a wedding?" Grimolf sneered. "They came for the promise of plunder, starting with the traitors who support Thorvald's brat." The tide of battle shifted instantly. Valdis's allies, already engaged with Grimolf's household warriors, now found themselves flanked by the Danish reinforcements. She saw one of her own men cut down, then another. Grimolf pressed his advantage, attacking with renewed confidence. He was older than Valdis but experienced, his strikes powerful and precise. She parried and countered, looking for an opening while trying to maintain awareness of the battle raging around them. A shout drew her attention momentarily. Kjartan was surrounded by 3 Danish warriors, fighting desperately while shielding Thyra behind him. The distraction nearly cost Valdis her life as Grimolf's blade whispered past her cheek, drawing blood. "Your Saxon lover will die slowly," Grimolf promised, pressing his attack. "After I've dealt with you." Fury gave Valdis new strength. She met Grimolf's next strike with such force that he staggered back, momentarily off balance. She followed with a flurry of blows, forcing him to give ground. "My father trusted you," she said through gritted teeth. "Called you friend. And you repaid him with treachery." Grimolf's face contorted. "Your father would have destroyed everything our ancestors built. Trading instead of raiding, making peace with Christians, diluting our ways with foreign customs." His next strike nearly broke Valdis's guard. "I did what was necessary to preserve our people." "You did what was necessary to seize power," Valdis countered, recovering and renewing her attack. "And you'll die for it." Their blades locked, bringing them face to face. For a moment, they were frozen in that position, strength against strength. Then Grimolf smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps," he said quietly. "But not before you watch your Saxon die." He jerked his head toward where Kjartan fought. The Danish warriors had driven him back against a pillar, and though he had felled one, the others were pressing their advantage. Worse, Jarl Sturkar himself was approaching from behind, drawing a long knife. Valdis felt a moment of pure terror. If she broke off her engagement with Grimolf to help Kjartan, she would expose herself to a killing blow. If she didn't, Kjartan would die. The choice was made in an instant. With a roar of defiance, she drove her knee into Grimolf's midsection, breaking the blade lock. As he staggered back, she turned and hurled her father's dagger, the one she had kept concealed in her sleeve, across the hall with deadly accuracy. The blade took Sturkar in the throat just as he was about to strike Kjartan from behind. The Danish Jarl dropped his weapon, hands going to the steel protruding from his neck, before collapsing to the floor. But Valdis's action left her vulnerable. Grimolf recovered quickly and pressed his advantage, his sword slicing toward her unprotected side. She twisted, too late to fully avoid the blow. His blade bit into her ribs, a line of fire that tore a gasp from her lips. Grimolf followed with a pummel strike to her temple that sent her crashing to her knees, ears ringing and vision blurred. Through the haze, she saw him standing over her, sword raised for a killing blow. "Like father, like daughter," he said with grim satisfaction. "Both too weak to rule." The sword began its downward arc. And then Grimolf stiffened, his eyes widening in shock. The tip of a blade protruded from his chest, dark with blood. Behind him stood Sigrid, her hands gripping the hilt of the sword she had driven through his back. "For 8 years I have waited," she said, her voice low and fierce. 8 years watching you destroy what Thorvald built. 8 years protecting his daughter from your ambitions. She twisted the blade, and Grimolf cried out in agony. Not his first daughter, you took her from me. But his second. My Thyra. Understanding dawned on Valdis through the pain and confusion. Sigrid had not been Grimolf's wife by choice, she had been Thorvald's second wife, the mother of his younger daughter, forced to marry his murderer to protect her child. Grimolf fell to his knees as Sigrid withdrew the sword. His gaze found Valdis, hatred and disbelief warring in his eyes. You cannot, the people will never. The people remember my father, Valdis said, struggling to her feet despite the wound in her side. And now they will remember his true heir. With the last of his strength, Grimolf lunged for her, a hidden knife appearing in his hand. But Valdis was ready. Her father's sword, the one she had carried in exile for 8 years, swept down in a final, decisive arc. Grimolf's head hit the floor of the great hall a moment before his body. For a heartbeat, the entire hall seemed to freeze, all eyes on the tableau at the high seat, Valdis standing over Grimolf's body, blooded but unbowed, Sigrid still holding the sword she had plunged into her husband's back, and between them, the severed head of the usurper. Then, from somewhere in the hall, a voice cried out, Valdis Thorvald's daughter. Rightful heir to Ravnholm. The cry was taken up by others, first Gunnar and his loyalists, then more warriors, then common folk who had witnessed the confrontation. Even some of Grimolf's own men, seeing their leader fallen and the tide turned against them, lowered their weapons. The Danish warriors, with their leader dead and their promised plunder now uncertain, hesitated. Kjartan, blooded but still standing, called out to them in their own tongue, Your Jarl is dead. This quarrel is not yours. Withdraw now, and no more Danish blood need be spilled this night. After a tense moment, the senior Danish warrior gave a curt nod. We came for a wedding and plunder, not to die in a Norse blood feud. He barked orders, and his men began a fighting withdrawal toward the doors. As the Danes retreated and the remaining resistance crumbled, Valdis felt the adrenaline that had sustained her begin to ebb. The wound in her side throbbed with each heartbeat, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. But she could not falter, not yet, not before all was secure. She turned to find Sigrid watching her, the older woman's face a complex mixture of emotions. Behind her stood Thyra, wide-eyed with shock and confusion. You knew, Valdis said to Sigrid. You recognized me at the harbor. Sigrid nodded. I suspected. You have your father's eyes. And I had heard rumors from traders, whispers of Thorvald's daughter living among the Saxons. She glanced at Kjartan, who was making his way toward them through the dispersing crowd. Though I did not expect you to bring one back with you. He saved my life, Valdis replied simply. Then, her gaze moving to Thyra, and you protected my sister all these years. I did what I had to do, Sigrid said, her voice softening. For her. For Thorvald's memory. She hesitated. For Ravnholm. Thyra stepped forward, her eyes, so like Valdis's own, searching her face. You're my sister? The one father spoke of before. She couldn't finish the sentence. Yes, Valdis said gently. Though I didn't know about you until tonight. Mother spoke of you sometimes, Thyra said. When we were alone. She said you would return one day to reclaim what was stolen. Valdis felt a lump form in her throat. She reached out hesitantly, and after a moment's pause, Thyra took her hand. You don't have to go to Hedaby, Valdis assured her. That arrangement died with Grimolf and Sturkar. Relief washed over the girl's face, quickly followed by uncertainty. But what happens now? To all of us? It was the question that hung in the air throughout the hall, as the wounded were tended to and the dead removed. What would come next? Who would lead them? Kjartan reached Valdis's side, his concern evident as he saw the blood staining her tunic. You need a healer, he said quietly. Later, she replied, though she accepted his supporting arm gratefully. First, we must secure the peace. With Kjartan's help, she made her way to the high seat, her father's seat, now rightfully hers. The hall gradually quieted as she stood before it, all eyes upon her. People of Ravnholm, Valdis began, her voice carrying clearly despite her fatigue. 8 years ago, treachery and murder stole your rightful Jarl. Tonight, with your courage and loyalty, that wrong has been righted. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. I am Valdis Thorvaldsdottir, daughter of the Eagle, returned to claim my birthright. But I return changed from the girl who fled these shores. She looked at Kjartan beside her. I have lived among those we once called enemies. I have learned their ways, as they have learned mine. And I have seen that there is another path for our people, one that honors our traditions while building new bonds of trade and alliance rather than endless raiding and blood feuds. This brought more mixed reactions, nods of agreement from some, frowns of concern from others. My father saw this truth before his time, Valdis continued. He understood that the world is changing, and that we must change with it if we are to prosper. Grimolf called this weakness, but I call it wisdom. She paused, looking out over the assembled people, warriors and farmers, craftspeople and servants, all waiting to hear what kind of leader she would be. I claim the Jarldom of Ravnholm by right of birth and by right of conquest, she declared. But I will rule as my father intended, with justice, with wisdom, and with an eye toward building a future where our children need not die on foreign shores for plunder they could earn through honest trade. She gestured to Sigrid and Thyra. Lady Sigrid protected my father's younger daughter at great personal cost. For her courage and sacrifice, she will be honored in Ravnholm for as long as I draw breath. Then, to the assembled warriors, those who fought for me tonight have my eternal gratitude. Those who fought against me but now lay down their weapons will find mercy rather than vengeance. And those who cannot accept my rule are free to depart with their honor intact. Ravnholm needs no unwilling subjects. Finally, she turned to Kjartan. In the stillness of the moment, their eyes met, and a lifetime of unspoken understanding passed between them. The Saxon warrior who stands beside me is Kjartan Ingvarsson of Northumbria. Without him, I would not be here today. He has proven himself a true friend to Ravnholm, and any who would question his place at my side question me as well. Gunnar stepped forward from the crowd, his voice gruff with emotion. The Eagle's daughter has returned. Hail Jarl Valdis! The cry was taken up throughout the hall, growing in volume until it seemed the very timbers shook with it. Hail Jarl Valdis! Hail Jarl Valdis! Only when the chant finally died down did Valdis lower herself carefully onto the high seat, her father's seat, now hers by right. The wound in her side throbbed painfully, but she kept her face composed. There would be time for healing later. Let the dead be honored according to their beliefs, she commanded. Let the wounded be tended. And let word be sent throughout the land, Ravnholm has its rightful ruler once more. As the hall began to clear, with warriors carrying out her orders and servants moving to clean up the aftermath of battle, Kjartan knelt beside the high seat. You should let the healer see to that wound, he said quietly. Valdis smiled wearily. Soon. She looked past him to where Sigrid was speaking with Thyra, the two of them casting occasional glances her way. I have much to learn about my sister. About what happened here while I was gone. You have time now, Kjartan reminded her. Grimolf is dead. The Jarldom is yours. Ours, Valdis corrected him, taking his hand. If you'll stay. Kjartan's expression grew serious. My place is with you, wherever that may be. But your people will learn to accept you, as I learned to see beyond the Saxon enemy. She squeezed his hand. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. No, he agreed with a small smile. The daughter of Thorvald never chose the easy path. In the days that followed, Ravnholm began to heal from 8 years of Grimolf's rule. Valdis established herself in the Great Hall, receiving oaths of loyalty from warriors and freemen alike. Most came willingly, seeing in her the return of her father's just leadership. A few departed, unable to accept a woman as Jarl or unwilling to follow the new path she proposed. Sigrid proved an invaluable ally, using her knowledge of Ravnholm's affairs to help Valdis navigate the complex web of alliances and enmities that had developed during her absence. Thyra, initially shy and uncertain around her newfound sister, gradually warmed to Valdis, especially when it became clear that she would not be forced into a political marriage against her will. Kjartan's position was more complicated. Some accepted him readily, particularly those who had fought alongside him against Grimolf. Others viewed him with suspicion, a Saxon in their midst. But as the days passed and they saw how he advised Valdis with wisdom and fought to protect Ravnholm's interests, even the most skeptical began to grudgingly acknowledge his worth. A month after the Winter Night's battle, with the first snows beginning to dust the hills around Ravnholm, Valdis called for a formal assembly of all free people to discuss matters of importance to the community. In the cleared space before the great hall, with the cold wind carrying the scent of the sea, she stood before her people. The winter comes, she began, and with it, the time of hearth and home, of stories and planning. But before we turn inward for the dark months, there is one matter that must be settled. She gestured, and Kjartan stepped forward to stand beside her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kjartan Ingvarsson of Northumbria has proven his loyalty to Ravnholm with blood and courage, Valdis declared. He has stood by my side in exile and in battle. And now I ask him to stand by my side in peace, as my husband and consort. The murmurs grew louder. This was unprecedented, a Jarl of Ravnholm taking a Saxon as husband. Yet none could deny what they had seen with their own eyes, how Kjartan had fought for their new Jarl, how he had helped secure her victory. Gunnar, now restored to his position as master smith, was the first to speak. The Saxon fought well, he acknowledged. But can he understand our ways? Will he honor our gods and traditions? I have lived among your people for 8 years, Kjartan replied, his Norse now almost unaccented. I have learned your language, your customs, your stories. I have sailed your seas and fought with your weapons. He paused. I do not ask you to forget that I was born Saxon, only to judge me by my actions rather than my birth. Others spoke, some in support, others raising concerns. Through it all, Valdis and Kjartan stood together, answering questions, addressing fears, sharing their vision of a Ravnholm that maintained its strength and traditions while forging new paths through trade rather than warfare. Finally, old Thora, the Volva who had served as Cirrus to 3 generations of Ravnholm's Jarls, stepped forward. The crowd fell silent, respecting her wisdom and connection to the gods. I have cast the runes, she announced, her voice surprisingly strong for one so aged. I have sought guidance from the All-Father. And this is what was shown to me, a raven and an eagle, flying together over peaceful lands. The old blood and the new, united in strength. She fixed her milky eyes on Kjartan. The Saxon has been tested and found worthy. Let him stand beside our Jarl, if that is her will. A weight seemed to lift from the assembly. If the Volva approved, who were they to object? Valdis raised her voice once more, let it be known throughout the land, at the spring thing, when the ice retreats and the world renews itself, I will take Kjartan Ingvarsson as my husband, binding his fate to Ravnholm's for all time. The winter passed in preparation, not just for the wedding, but for the new course Valdis was charting for her people. Messengers were sent to neighboring Jarldoms, proposing trade agreements rather than the raiding alliances Grimolf had favored. Ships were repaired and reinforced, but now with an eye toward carrying goods rather than warriors. Kjartan sent word to his lord in Northumbria, explaining his choice and requesting permission to forge a lasting peace between their peoples. The reply, when it came with the first trading ships of spring, was cautious but hopeful. The Saxon lord was willing to consider Valdis's proposal of regular trade and mutual defense against common threats. Thyra blossomed under her sister's guidance, revealing a quick mind for numbers and trade that proved invaluable as Ravnholm shifted its focus. Sigrid, freed from the shadow of her forced marriage to Grimolf, became Valdis's closest advisor, her knowledge of the eastern fjords opening new possibilities for alliances. When spring finally arrived, turning the grey world green once more, Ravnholm celebrated not just the wedding of their Jarl but the beginning of a new era. Ships from neighboring settlements arrived bearing gifts and curious visitors. Even a small contingent from Northumbria made the journey, led by Kjartan's brother, curious to see the Norse woman who had won their kinsman's heart. The ceremony itself blended traditions, Norse and Saxon, old ways and new. Vows were exchanged before the gods of both peoples, swords and rings were given, and the skalds composed new verses to commemorate the union. As the celebration continued into the night, with music and feasting and tales of both people's heroes, Valdis found a quiet moment with Kjartan away from the revelry. "Are you satisfied, Jarl Valdis?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the stars above. "With having my birthright restored? With seeing my father's murderer brought to justice? With finding a sister I never knew?" She smiled, taking his hand. "Or with having a stubborn Saxon who refuses to let me face any battle alone?" "All of it," he replied, returning her smile. "Everything that has led us here." Valdis looked out over Ravnholm, her home, her responsibility, her legacy. The lights of the settlement twinkled below them, and beyond, the dark expanse of the sea reflected the moon's path. 8 years ago, I thought everything was lost," she said softly. "My father, my home, my future. I never imagined I would stand here again, let alone with you beside me." She turned back to him. "So yes, I am satisfied. More than that, I am hopeful. For Ravnholm. For us." Kjartan drew her close. "Your father would be proud of what you've built." "What we've built," she corrected him. "The lost princess has returned, the throne is reclaimed, and the Jarl." She smiled up at him. "The Jarl has no intention of letting you go." Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unchanging yet ever new. Below, in the great hall of Ravnholm, two peoples who had once been enemies raised cups together in celebration. And between them stood Valdis and Kjartan, living proof that even the deepest divisions could be healed by understanding, courage, and love that refused to acknowledge the boundaries drawn by history and hatred. The saga of the lost princess and her Saxon warrior would be told for generations, a reminder that the future is not bound by the past, that new paths can be forged even in the most ancient of lands, and that the greatest strength often comes from embracing change rather than fearing it.